Jake Spotted Wolf is a Assiniboine and Hidatsa Lakota enrolled in and supported by the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Sanish tribes of North Dakota. Jake's family resides in the Fort Peck Reservation in Poplar and Forsyth, Montana. Jake is an organizer, a writer, a speaker, and a frontline water protector, establishing their activism in southern Idaho and later, for most of their organizing life, in the Coast Salish territory in the occupied Duwamish lands in the Pacific Northwest. In the summer of 2021, Jake moved to northern Minnesota and resided mostly at Camp Migazi during the campaign to shut down Enbridge Line 3. There, Jake built a fundraising team, bringing funds to cover food and winter supplies and building materials to fortify the infrastructure of Migazi. Jake operated as the project manager in that space, working with white accomplices and Native comrades to build facilities that would keep the camp sustainably running as a decolonization space and a cultural center long after the Line 3 battle ended. Jake helped institute recovery meetings for individuals struggling with their sobriety as they fought the police and the community violence that occurred on Line 3. Jake is currently living in Wawayantanong, also known to some as Detroit, Michigan, raising her two nephews, working in environmental justice in the Southwest Detroit Environmental Vision. Jake is also co-founder of the Tachilia Collective, a collective comprised of mutual aid and accomplices working to break the dependency of capitalist systems and instead build community infrastructure and wellness. Tachilia Collective was founded in December of 2021 by water protectors who were all active during the Line 3 movement in Minnesota during the summer before. The organization is focused on dispersing mutual aid to Native and Black Americans and anyone else who might not be fitting in those categories, who are often missed by social services and resource centers that are not able to catch them. So welcome, Jake. We're so glad you're here with us. And today we're going to have a conversation about the Land Back movement. I didn't get a chance to kind of see where the audience is, so I'm just going to open it up to you, Jake, what it is you'd like to tell us about the Land Back movement and the effect of colonization and capitalism on Native communities.
Thank you for having me. I'll clear up two of the interpretations. You did great, Migizi and Tachihila. Those are really, really hard words. And if I didn't correct them, my ancestors would come for me.
No worries.
I thought about how to pursue this conversation. It's always a very sticky one because like westernized belief systems think about land in a different way. They think about it in the terms of resources, in the terms of wealth, in the terms of that it is something to be conquered, something to be taken from. And this is historical, not just to Native America. And it's really hard to sit down and have this conversation with people who have, 150 years, sometimes up to 200 years of their family coming to America and settling, and trying to get them to understand the terms, the concepts around what we mean when we say land back, and also to quantify it in ways that they might understand. And what inspiration came to me, because that's usually how I do these talks, is I kind of, parse it out with the ancestors and listen to my inner wisdom. And really what came to me tonight was that we would walk through, what that experience might be like if you were on the receiving end, as though you were Native America, say 250, 300 years ago, right? To try to get us to a place where we can maybe come to the conversation at all. And what I mean is, what would it feel like to have a foreign body come to your land, you don't speak the language, you don't understand their clothing, you don't understand their traditions, the way that they speak, you don't understand any of this, and they bring with them at first, there's a friendly air to them, there's a sense that they want to get along, that they want to build relationship, and then over time there's that shifts when they realize not only do you have land and you have been stewarding that land for thousands of years, but that land is a wealth of resources that might help establish their own generational wealth and establish their own standing in their communities and um, in their social, class, economic, um, social standing. And those people come and they change the narrative from we want to be friendly to now we want your land and we don't care what we're going to have to do to take it, and you don't speak the language and you can't find back, and they're bringing biological warfare right to your home, and in our case that's smallpox blankets and it's other diseases right that come and ravage through our community,
You.
and they bring eventually, they get tired of trying to make treaties, of trying to make agreements with you. They get tired of trying to come to the table and talk it out. So then eventually they learn you, they understand you a little more, and they get to know that if they kill the source of your clothing and of your tools and of your shelter, like they did with the Buffalo kills, and in a couple of decades more, if they start to rip your children from your breast and send them to residential schools. And later on, if they start to refer to your community as poor parents who don't know how to raise children, who are savage, and start taking those children from you in the 60s scoop, all so that you will give up and hand your land over, hand over whatever rights you have left. How would that impact you as a person? And now we have where we are in 2025, right? The current day picture of what, I didn't even touch on all of the battles. I didn't touch on all of the backroom deals where the language was changed in a treaty last minute and nobody was given notice of that. And chiefs that had traveled thousands or hundreds of miles to get to DC were all of a sudden caught, having to make a decision that gave them a little, or else they would lose it all. And they would have to decide for their entire nation. We don't call them tribes, we call them nations. And that kind of, the chicanery that comes, the element of trickery that comes with how land was taken in the country. A lot of women, a lot of children died, and it's nothing dislike Palestine right now. The two are very, very similar in their genocides, in that they knew if they, killed off women and killed off children, for one, they would stop a bloodline, and two, the warrior would eventually have such a broken spirit that they wouldn't be able to fight anymore, and they would want to hand their land over. So, in regards to how would that feel, picture that in your mind of over time, somebody is systematically doing that to you and your family, and speed it up and put it all into like a 20-minute little event of somebody coming into your home and literally taking it at one point, right? That's what natives have been enduring in our country for almost 400 years. And in that, we have now landed in this place where we are so dehumanized and we are so broken spiritually and economically, socially. There's a ton of racism happening out on reservation spaces. It was only in the 60s that we were allowed to leave reservation spaces without having to ask for a permit from the federal government. So, in as much as people might think that we want all of our land back, which we do, that's not a lie. We would like to have it back because we could steward it, right? we could take care of it, we could nurture it, we could get it back to health, and then we wouldn't have these natural disasters that are happening out in California. We wouldn't have the earthquakes that are happening because of fracking. We wouldn't have rivers drying up, and wildlife dying off in certain areas of the United States. Um, the tundra, right? Like we wouldn't have rivers rising. That's what we want. We want to take care of and renew the earth so that everybody is well and everybody is cared for, including our white treaty partners and non-native treaty partners and everybody who has come to this country. So it's not about possession or ownership for us. It's about renewing our cultural ties. A lot of reservations are in spaces where um, it's inhabitable, truly, and natives have had to figure that out. And that's true for Fort Peck. In our region of Montana, you can't grow our first foods, that we used to grow there. Um, Oil fields out in North Dakota, where I'm enrolled, um, dominate the land. So it's poisoned. Our deer don't travel the same pathways anymore. We can't just go out and hunt buffalo. Um, so we would like to do that, like in order to bring health back to our communities, but also to be able to get the settler descendant to understand that there's more than just resource or property wealth to come from being in relationship with the land. And it's not about ownership for us. It's about needing to reconcile all this blood that's been spilt, all of this trauma that has happened to Black and brown bodies on this land due to colonization, due to greed, due to capitalism, due to resource extraction, due to generative wealth, that a part of the country gets to see, and then a huge part of the country does not, right? Um, and in that, it wouldn't be a punishment, right? Like we're not trying to get revenge, and yet it's still challenging. It's still challenging to have these talks about land back, because if you do own property in anywhere in the United States of America, as a descendant, a settler descendant, that's established you, right? Like that's given you access to upward mobility. That's given you access to resources. And we understand that as Native people. We understand what safety and security wants to feel like. We don't oftentimes have it. I barely am hanging on by a thread most of the time. But we understand wanting that. And we understand that in this system, the way to get that is through property ownership and accumulating wealth. And in that, we do have empathy for where the descendant and land ownership are a concern. And yet, in our inner wisdom and in having a relationship with the ancestors who have lived here for millennia and still being in contact with them, we know that we won't heal this land until some kind of inroads are made, some kind of effort to reconcile, to repair on a major level. Because we know that there's small, very small, too small efforts being made to make repair with Black bodies. And yet, if you look around, there's no conversation around Native American repair, because there are so many, my theory at least is, and I bet, if you ask yourself and your friends who are white, truly, what is holding you back from talking about the Native issue? For one, it's erasure. We weren't given the education, we weren't given the proper teachings about what's happened in Native American history, where colonial settlerism is an issue. And it's a hard topic because it means we have to have some really, really hard conversations. Some, coming to our own responsibility in that matter, right? I have a white passing or a white mother, British and Nordic. Those are my three bloodlines: colonizers and dominators on one half, and then Native people to this land who have been subject to hundreds of years of genocide. And there's a lot, of questions that come up for me when I have to represent my community, but also be responsible about how we go about having these conversations and being honest with myself about what did my white half do? You know, they are poor whites and they always have been. We never got to the point where we were landowners. We were farmers and we herded sheep out in Montana and in Idaho. Um, Loggers, kind of salt of the earth people, and yet we still have privilege. We still have privilege that I have to be very honest about, and yet I still have and hold all of the generational trauma in my body of a native child. I am, a descendant directly of a full-blooded native person. I am half, and I have all of that blood memory. I have all of that living in my body, and trying to, bring this message to others, that we make a dent in the erasure, that we are honest with our how deep and committed to our anti-racist work are we going to get, right? And learning that once we get to that point where we're actually working together, and there is something of a land back movement, there is something about an honest talk about Native Americans and how colonial settlerism has impacted us here, and where that's a bigger part of the discussion. And it's not just what's right in front of our face in the news every day. And we're digging for that information. We're learning the true history, and we're actually getting a very clear perspective about what happened. And it's not the perspective told to us in our high school classes. Definitely not the fallacy of that we shared a meal for Thanksgiving and got along just fine, and that trope is perpetrated further, right, upon Native Americans and perpetuated, that we do that learning and that we understand this is in the best interest of everyone walking around in, so-called America, or what we refer to as Turtle Island, in that we are in a really, really bad way right now. Culturally, everybody is suffering. On res, off res, with the elements of what we have to endure in regards to violence, in regards to economic policy, in regards to how our government is run, and how there's very little protection when you really look around, that you cannot go protest anymore. You can't use freedom of speech to speak up for your rights, because every time there's an uprising, more and more laws are put into effect uh, to take away those freedoms. Sovereignty isn't just for natives, sovereignty is being attacked for descendants as well. So it's a matter of, do we want to get serious about this now, or in 50 years when so much damage has been done and it's too late to have these talks? And I have to also be very real about that it is the settler descendant and the white passing people that have to take this work on, because that's where the power lies, right? In any city council, in any school district, in juries, in Congress, and the House of Representatives, that is at least half white and then a little bit mixed with other ethnicities on the other side. But it's unbalanced, right? And it is planned that way. It is meant that way so that, that fear of, whatever happened in the white body in Europe thousands of years ago, where their land was attacked, because everybody is indigenous. If you look back far enough, and everybody had spiritual practices that brought them closer to the land and brought them closer to their ancestors. And then somebody wanted to come in and take their sacred sites, and somebody wanted to come in and take all of their, um, lumber and all of their soil that they had been praying over for thousands and thousands of years previous. And that's where it started to happen, that disconnect with spirituality and the land, that kept us in relationship with each other as relatives, not as human being versus object. And that fracture then passed down century over century, right? to get us to the point here where we can't even protect children, in school shootings. And that's an abomination. And the rest of the world agrees because they all have laws to prevent that kind of thing. So culturally, it has impacted us so much as a nation and broken us down to the point where are we in our morality? And how do we get the settler descendant back to their indigenous roots, even if they never plan to go back to Poland or Ukraine or Croatia, Britain, Sweden, but they were to remain here. We've got to, help facilitate that relationship and get it back to the point where people can see the land as something that needs to be cared for, that is a relative, that deserves respect, that deserves kindness and reciprocation in order for us to heal any of this. And in that, I hope that white descendants can start to come to the table and have these honest talks. And I'm really grateful for the space to do that here, and the time that you guys have given me, because I see that it's about 7:30. I think you guys gave me a half hour.
Yeah.
Um,
Could you as we wind up your half of your time, what would land back look like to you if you were the one with the magic pen that could make this? What would it look like?
Literally, it would be back in the hands of the territory that you live on. So here in Detroit, all of this land would be back in the stewardship of whatever tribe used to live right here in Wabiatanong. And then it would go, that same thing would be true for every tribe in Michigan, right? Every band that's all Anishinaabe territory here. Some states it's Anishinaabe and Dakota. Some states it's Puebla and Dana. In every state, it would look like literally, instead of the BLM, the United States government, having the say or having the deed and having the title to land, it would be back in the ownership, the stewardship, not the ownership of Native peoples. That is a faraway dream. And even though I could speak it out into the universe here in this Zoom call, I am a realist. So then what it could look like is petitioning your local colleges. Most of them are on indigenous land, a lot of them on sacred sites, and getting them to give back more of what. I drive up 75 and into the forests or the woods here, and you can see all the different places where U of M, owns land throughout the entire state of Michigan. Why don't the Anishinaabe have that land back? Why? What is it? U of M's just sitting on it for estate purposes, to like, sometimes it is for research, and I respect that, but natives also know how to research. you know Natives know we have like empirical wisdom as well. We have thousands of years of scientific data. Nobody wants our data. Nobody wants to hear what we had to say about how plants grow in relationship to human beings being near, and what kind of soil mediation like could happen in order to get like the best crop with no pesticides, no kind of chemical intervention to feed many many people still. you know why can't that be a conversation? Universities and trusts, within major metropolitan areas, municipalities, and if we can't shoot for those stars, then what do you have in your own family, and how is that property serving an indigenous community? How could it be that I was just at a retreat for water protectors this weekend, and they own an arena and a whole barn of horses for people to come and keep their horses and to show and to ride um for equestrianism. And how could that look different? That's a Hungarian descendant, that's a friend of mine. His grandfather owned that home and that property. It's only 45 minutes away. They've got generational wealth built up for many generations, and there are many native families in the vicinity that are just dying in poverty and I don't mean that facetiously, on a daily basis, from either suicides, domestic violence, drug addiction, alcoholism. So it is a modern day issue. It is a thing that is very real. And how could that friend and I talked about, he's like, what can we do to make this valuable to the Native community? And I was like, open it up to the most marginalized, right? Like, how do you get horses in here that are accessible to people who have never ridden before because it's an access barrier? How do you open it up to people who are terrified to ride, because you know, they've never been given access to nature, and or told that they couldn't, that is a theme for a lot of Black bodies. Um, so it can be a theme practice in day to day, and we have to get creative about it and also brave. Because again, ask yourself that question: am I willing to hand over my land? Am I willing to sign a deed over? I've had so many people come up after talks and say, oh, I've got a house in like Ferndale. I mean, not that exact scenario. And, I could talk to my lawyer and see what we could do, and then drop off the face of the earth. And that house never comes into Native hands. That property never sees Native hands. It's good intention, but it's almost worse. Don't offer me your property, because I will take that property and turn it into a space for a sweat lodge and a cultural center, because Natives don't have one at all. We have IHS in Detroit that's not available to us all the time. The sweats have to be planned for when you can get a water pourer in there. The doors are locked. The helpers are behind a plastic, double thick window that you can't even have a normal conversation with. I will take somebody's land if they're willing to give that to me, but don't offer it if you cannot be sincere about it, because that's traumatic. Again, that's like giving the thing and taking it back. And like, oh, I just, it wasn't the right time. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel right to us to have our land taken. you know, it felt very bad, as a matter of fact. So, very traumatizing. And the proof of that is around me every single day. There are solutions. It's just, we've got to get brave about what we're willing to sacrifice, what we're willing to learn about our true history, and how we're willing to go about having those exchanges and those relationships actually, come into fruition.
So you have to make a move at 7:30, did you say?
Yeah, I'm going to hop onto the Zoom through my phone.
All right.
And carry you guys out to the car with me.
So this is a good opportunity for those of you listening to think about what questions that you might pose to Jake, or what more do you want to know about what has come up for you as she has spoken. Darby, let's give them a second to get back on, but yeah.
Sure. And if somebody wants to go before me, that's fine too.
No, you had your hand up first. That works for me. For those of you who are joining us late, a caregiver had to drop out for the last minute for Jake, so she's got to go pick up a kid. She is a single mother raising her nephews. So things happen and we adjust.
Thank you for your grace.
No problem. All right, Darby, go ahead. Shoot off your first question.
Yeah, so I am, there's part of me that's very sad at, what Europeans have done to the land. And Jake, are you saying that there are lots and lots of people in your community that would be on the ready with Native American wisdom that are inspired after all this time to to make the land whole again?
Yeah. And you wouldn't hardly find a native who is traditional and practicing their culture and like doing that spiritual work who would disagree with me that, you know, we are also colonized as people, and there is some element of, you know, some of us, I guess, could also just want the land back and then kick the white people off. That's true, but we also, I think there's again the realists out there that understand that that's not a possibility. There's no system in place for that. And again, if we're practicing our spiritual traditions, we want to have relationships. We want to heal the land. And if that looks like the new normal of natives and white descendants doing this work together, then yes.
Can I ask kind of a subsequent question?
Yep.
So, you know, since the Industrial Revolution and the computer age and all of the things that have happened over time, would you want to go back? I mean, what would energy look like?
It's a very common question, which is interesting. That it's presumed if we decolonize, because I've heard this from Native American elders before, that they don't want to go back to without cars or without access to like convenience. And I think it gets confused that decolonizing our land back, that the perceived goal is that we want to go back to pre-contact, pre-industry. Mm-hmm. And again, that's unrealistic, and it's not feasible. And also, we were modern. People perceived natives as kind of dumb, you know, that we didn't know science, we didn't know math, we didn't know how the earth works. And that's a really common misconception, that we would be going back to like rudimentary things when we have breaking thought.
Well, we're losing you a little bit there, Jake. And I'm just going to kind of jump in and
dwellings for thousands of years made out of clay, those are sustainable. Those are environmentally friendly. They're still withstanding the weather out there after being there for thousands of years. If you mix safe, sustainable, environmentally friendly, true environmentally friendly concepts and ideas with indigenous wisdom, you have like a utopia of ideas and access to having convenience while also preserving the land, preserving the people, and ending the American genocide.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Reverend G.
And you.
I have a question. You know, I'm thinking about the practical side of this, and you know, I never thought about it before tonight. That's the truth. So the way we took land away from you was through cruel power.
Yep.
Deceit, complete humiliation, and we oppressed you completely.
Yes.
So I imagine that it is in nobody's interest to do that now in reverse.
No, it is not.
Right. So what would that look like? How would that look like? You know, because I can only if I think about this, and I am an immigrant here, so I wasn't even born on this land. If I think about this, I imagine that other whites think about this too. That if we've done this to you, why wouldn't you do that to us in return?
Because we have different belief systems. Very, very different. To us, as much as the fairy tale is out there, or the mythology that we were always a warring people, we were always out there taking other nations' lands away, warring tribes, as you guys would have it referred to. That's a huge, huge myth. We lived in relationship to each other. We stayed, kind of to our own spaces, but because there was a protocol around that. So when it comes to revenge, vengeance, which we would be owed 1,000%, if every white descendant knew exactly the harms that had been done here, anybody would agree that that would be called for. But that's not in our creed. And I think that's true for any Native American I've talked to who is walking a spiritual path and practicing their cultural traditions, that we uphold life utmost, above all. Nothing else is higher. Not a god, not wealth, not nothing. No politics is above that. And that means children. That means water. Water is life to us. That means anything that grows food is life. Any human being that we are in relationship to or with, even if it's not a reciprocal relationship, we honor and uphold life above all. So in as much as my family is suffering incredibly so back on Fort Peck right now, and it's all due to economic deprivation, social class, racism, all of it. And I don't want that for them. It would be easy for me to say, well, it's the white person's fault. They owe my family a ton of reparations, and that looks like blood to me. No, I don't want anybody's blood, because that won't heal anything. It won't heal nothing. No good will come from it. More harm will come from it. And we understand reciprocation in a way in our communities. That's our transactional wisdom. It's not about who has the most of something or who has the things that I can get from them. It's, are you cared for? Are you well? How can I help you be well if you're not well? And I will do whatever I can after my family is provided for to make sure that yours is also. And because that is kind of a standard across Turtle Island in so many of the Native peoples I've been in conversation with, it's not eye for an eye is a Christian belief, plain and simple. And violence begets violence, plain and simple. And at the end of the day, that's not who we are as people, and that's not how we walk.
Thank you.
Have you ever heard of the term?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. Go ahead. Have you ever heard of counting coup?
Say again?
Counting coup. It's, I think, a term that white people have heard in relation to Native Americans, mostly to Plains Indians, like the Sioux, which is, my origins. Counting coup is when, instead of killing the person that you're at war with, you scare the death out of them. You scare them by giving them the teaching. You scare them by giving them the truth. You scare them by teaching them humility and that what they're doing is wrong, but you don't actually kill them. So if that's the truth for our tribe, it's also the truth for many other tribes. Sorry to interrupt you.
Not at all. Kathy, you have your finger up?
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Jake, thank you so much for explaining the Native perspective on this particular issue. I too have not been in the loop on these kinds of discussions, and I appreciate hearing your your point of view. To be honest, if I were a Native American who had my land stolen, I would be damn pissed. And I'm sure I would carry that on until there was some kind of restoration process made. So thank you for that. And secondly, I totally apologize for any for the assault that my ancestors perpetrated on your tribes. I am very sorry for that. And I would hope that I would never be anything that I personally would do to another human being. So I apologize for that. And my question would be, are there any small successes in your quest to gain control of property back? Do you have any examples of maybe small pieces that are working successfully? Like personally, I can't imagine giving up my deed to my home. It would just, that's probably the ideal, but it's a big giant step. And maybe there are some baby steps. So I'm wondering, are there any examples that you can share with us? Thank you.
I'm organized with a collective called Techihila that does a lot of mutual aid work, reparations work. If people come to us for, they got a sick baby in the hospital and all their money has gone to medical bills, they need money right away, we give them whatever we can. But we don't have a source of income coming in. Like it's coming from a grant that I won from First Nations Development Institute in 2023. We keep on trying for a piece of property over in on Tillman that we could turn into a cultural hub, and the land bank keeps on fighting us. The wins are that we do have, that little grant to work from, and that has been, feeding people, literally putting cars back on the road, buying skins for teepees. It has gone back into the Native community and Black bodies. The wins are that, that we do have a small bundle of resources that we are working with to try to help people in the collective that is doing the land back work and mutual aid work. But everything comes to an end, and unless we do get some kind of regular generated money coming into that collective, that work will stop, and unless the land bank finally accepts our application that we have put in 4 different times, so they keep on asking for more and more. No, we don't have the big win I think that you're referencing. There are tribes, that you hear in the news that have got, 14,000 acres back, small wins like that. But in terms of local indigenous here in Detroit, Wawiatinong doing that work, no, not really.
Didn't Oakland University give some small, insignificant piece of land back?
I haven't heard of it. It's probably true. I don't deny that. Usually anything that happens within the indigenous community I hear about, but I have not heard about that yet. Does not mean that it did not happen, however.
Right. And we're talking like a couple acres, not even anything to speak of. So yeah, the wins are small. I think that I've heard of Unitarian Universalist churches who are looking at trying to think about what a tax would be on our property. We don't pay property taxes, but what would it be on our property, and could we give that to a Native community instead, or donate it to the Native community as a way of making reparations? Not exactly land back, but at least it's a step forward for that sort of funding, the kind of mutual aid that the Native community needs. Is there any other questions? Marcia, oh, wait, Connie. Connie has been unmuted
Yeah.
and on deck. Go, Connie, go.
Okay, thanks. Nice to meet you, Jake.
Thank you.
I currently live in an intergenerational home, and I think it'd be interesting to hear your point of view. You made the remark that you are connected to your ancestors, and even within our home here, I often feel disconnected. So I'm wondering, how is it that your community feels that connection?
Well, because it's inherent, and again, that's a spiritual belief I had to allow myself to get to after years of, honestly, psychosis, of feeling crazy in my body, of feeling like I didn't understand why I felt connected to ancestral wisdom after having been raised in a white community, away from my people, but being very, very inherently present in that way for a very long time. And in that, if you really boil it down to, do I have an ancestor? We all do. We all do. We might have questions about whether Jesus Christ was real. I believe he was. I believe, he was a stellar guy and did a lot of great work. But do I, believe in that faith per se prescribed by the doctrine? No. But I know I have an ancestor, and I know that any descendants that come from my family line will have lived and walked this earth. That's indisputable. So just holding on to knowing that that is true, and then allowing myself to accept that their energy isn't necessarily gone, right? Like, it's not necessarily a belief system, and maybe it is, but we perceive it as when you walk on, which is what white people would call dying. When you walk on, you just pass from this physical realm onto a spiritual realm and into the ether. And in that, you do still exist. And I have the closest experience with it was recently in June. The woman that I was co-parenting with, my best friend, when I got the boys last November, she saved our whole operation. She committed suicide in June. She, cut her arms deep to make sure she got the job done. And I sat at her sacred fire for 4 days, praying for her to make sure she made it to the ancestors. And being that close to somebody who, we were in her backyard, and she had committed suicide in her bathtub, being that close to the energy of what had just happened, and feeling it, that sensation of when I would go use the bathroom in her house after her body had just been removed, of my legs feeling like I had wanted to pass out. Like, I was like, that was her blood leaving her body. Like, I was that close to the energy of what her body metaphysically felt as she was passing from one realm to another. And just the sensation of praying for her every day, as you would in any faith whatsoever. And making sure, because you cared about this woman so much, and she cared about me so much while she was still alive, that I wanted nothing more than for her to be safe when she made it to the other side, wherever that might be. That in that care I had for her, I put all of my love, all of my healing, all of my wisdom, all of my momentum and enthusiasm, that she would make it to where she needed to go to be safe. And in that being such a recent experience, I could never deny, that there are ancestors, and that we are close to them, and that they are always watching over us, and that they are there to be in community with us.
Okay, thank you.
I'm walking into this building to get my children, so apologies.
Well, are there any last questions? Oh, Marcia, you had your hands up. Did you have a question, Marcia? You're muted, darling. You're muted. We can't hear you, Marcia.
So off the topic, but I live near the Huron-Potawatomi Reservation, and saw quite a change over the last 34 years when they opened their casino. and the wealth that was infused into that community, that reservation from the casino. What are your thoughts on the
Casinos and native wealth? It's a fallacy. For one, not every native community has a casino on their reservation, and a lot of people perceive that we do. Sorry, I give talks. And they think that we're all living wealthily off of casino royalties. So if you don't have a casino, you're not getting that royalty. And not every casino has a policy that they put that money back into their community. Thank you. So I think while it was a way for tribes to maintain sovereignty, and that's why a lot of them do have casinos. Oh, that's why thank you so much. A lot of tribes do practice and exercise that right to have casinos. It also keeps our youth who may or may not graduate high school but are old enough to work in a casino, it keeps them stuck there. It keeps them in that cycle of, well, I can make better money at the casino than I can by having to leave the res and try to apply for college and get to a new community where, there's racism and my social safety is here. It's not great. There's the addiction that runs in Native communities that runs rampant, also oftentimes plays out in casino spaces. And in that only breeds itself more dysfunction. So I don't see the casinos as a positive thing. I don't see them as something that we should quantify as a productive means of accessing wealth. And again, for all those reasons I mentioned, I don't see them as anything functional. I see them as another exploitative venture by the United States government to try to keep us under their thumb because of the common theme that you can also drink freely if you gamble in casinos. While you're there gambling, again, it only leads to more alcoholism. It's just, I feel like it's a very traumatic exercise in trying to have Native communities exercise sovereignty.
Well, we're going to let you go. We know you have parenting duties to attend to. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here, and you've given us many things to think about going forward. I hope that this was a good experience for you, because it certainly was for us.
It was. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for everybody for listening. It's very uncomfortable. You guys had really good questions. I think they're questions that people want to ask all the time, and they don't know if they can. They don't know if they should. They feel ashamed to ask these questions. But if we don't start with what feels like the stupid question, we'll never get to the bigger questions of what do we do. So I think that these themes are necessary to discuss and to explore. And I'm happy to help facilitate that. However, in the future, if you have other congregations that need support, just let me know.
Will do. Have a good evening and drive safely.
Thank
Thanks
you
again for being here.